Okay, I gathered up a whole bunch of old pictures that I could find and making a little story about my family history here. So there's my grandfather, Fidel Laviolette, who I'm named after, and his sister is over to his right, and then she just got married to Uncle Arthur right there, and and this is their wedding. It was at Millardsville. Um, my other grandparents weren't there because she was English and they all talked French, and she didn't like being in amongst the Frenchmen because they wouldn't talk to her. I guess that's what I was told. So anyway, this is the big wedding, and so they were logging. My two grandfathers, they were logging at Squamish, and here they are on the railroad. This is where they started on the railroad logging. And they came out from New Brunswick, you see. They said there was lots of work out here. So in Squamish, it used to be called Newport. I think that's what I was told. So here they are on this train. One of my grandfathers, he was the brakeman. I don't know what the other one did. Anyway, they won the donkey engine off their boss, and so then they went logging on their own. They hired Granddad said they hired a bunch of fallers from Vancouver, fell the wood, and then they took that donkey engine and yarded in all the logs. I guess they rigged up a spar tree, and they made some money. And so they kept logging like on their own instead of working for people after that. So this is the cookhouse and the cook. And Grandma told me the name of all these people, but I forget. I don't even know where the original picture is. This came out of a magazine that she wrote the story about it. And so that's a copy out of a magazine. The Highballer magazine, actually. And this was up in Squamish somewhere. And then I met the guy online that lost the donkey, and his grandfather lost the donkey engine, and so we had quite a talk. And so anyway, this was the crew. And you can see my grandfather Laviolette. He's the guy with the buttons down the middle of his sweater there. And here he is again. They used to trim the logs on the end so they wouldn't hang up. And their granddad, my grandfather Laviolette, he went back to New Brunswick and got married to Lena LeBlanc. And then they moved back out here. And that picture there, that must have been before he went back east and got married. And I remember Uncle Arthur and Aunt Esther. Aunt Esther, we went to her place. That was the first time I seen a TV, 1957 maybe. And then Dad was born in 1922. He looks pretty happy. And they had this was a sawmill, and they sawed a bunch of lumber up, and they built a flume all the way from Scott Cove up to the lake, Loose Lake, I think it's called. And then after that episode, they went to Echo Bay and built a hotel. They had help from the shingle mill guy at Echo Bay. I forget his name. But anyway, there's the bluff at Echo Bay. That's why they called it Echo Bay, I guess. Things would echo. And there's the little hotel they built at Echo Bay. And I guess during the Depression, everybody was out of work, so he put them to work building the little hotel, and they had that little mill at Scott Cove, so I guess they milled up all the lumber. And there they had the little hotel. That was before it was painted. And this is the color they painted it. All the rooms were upstairs, and then they had a really cool attic that I used to go and investigate. Had lots of native art up there. My grandfather Laviolette died in 1947. And here's my grandfather Levesque, Amity Levesque. And Sybil, her last name was Dakin before they got married. They met in Squamish when Granddad was working up there when they won that donkey engine. And Grandma and Granddad Dakin, they came from England. I think Grandpa Dakin was born in on the Isle of Man. I think Grandma Dakin was from Liverpool, and they both remarried. They both had a family before that. Grandpa Dakin had 5 boys, and Grandma Dakin had 1 girl, and she's not in this picture. She was older than Grandma by, I don't know, 8 or 10 years maybe. And so there they are. And Grandma Dakin, she died in 1945. She's buried in Alert Bay, and Grandpa Dakin, he's buried in Vancouver. We found that his grave, and there was no headstone, so Phil put a real nice headstone on it. And there's Grandma when they first moved from England to Vancouver. I think she was 9. And there's Grandpa Dakin's grave. You see the dirt there? I brought that from Alert Bay and put it on there. And there's Grandma Dakin's grave in Alert Bay, and I got dirt from Grandpa Dakin's grave and put it on Grandpa Dakin's grave. And there's Mum. And so that's kind of cool. And there's Grandma and Mum. Granddad had a logging outfit in Scappoose, Oregon. They had a big house on Highbury Street in Vancouver, but they logging in Scappoose, Oregon. So there's Uncle Dan and Mom in the wheelbarrow, and there they are. And when the Depression hit, well, Granddad mortgaged the house in Vancouver, but then the whole thing collapsed and he lost everything. Mom said they had a garage sale. They had all their furniture out and sold it all and moved up the coast. And here they are up the coast. They get the steam donkey going, and they did some hand log. And the Columbia, it was the hospital ship that came around from camp to camp. I even remember it there. I got my vaccination on that ship. And what they would do is put a spar tree up the hill, and yard the logs down to the water with the A-frame. That spar tree up the hill, they would log all the logs around, or else, put another spar tree and cold deck it then. And then here's Grandma and Granddad's logging camp. He would always set it up so this A-frame was right there with the logging camp. So they just had to come out of the cookhouse or out of the bunkhouse and start logging. And there's, back in the steam donkey days, there's Granddad and Uncle Paul, who I'm named after, with the steam donkey in the background. And here's Granddad running his steam donkey. Mom said she took that picture. So I guess they could make a lot of energy using steam, but they had to cut up their best logs. And you had to go everywhere by boat. There was lots of logging float camps, All my relations had float camps all up and down. They all logged like this with the spar tree up the hill and the A-frame down below. And they would bring in the logs to that spar tree and then down to the water. And that's where all the kids grew up on those float camps. It was just like normal to them. Then every once in a while, though, they had to get on the boat and go have a picnic somewhere to shore, find a nice beach. And there's a couple of my uncles on a double ender. I don't know where they're going. Somewhere. They'd go take the rowboat so they could row to shore and have the picnics. And there's Grandma Dakin. I guess after Grandpa Dakin died, well, she was the cook. And she had sayings for everything. And here's some people there. So here's Mom and Auntie Yvonne and Auntie Pearl. Must have been summertime. They're soaking their hot feet. Pearl can't quite reach the water. I suppose they had all those little brownie cameras in those days. Everybody had one of them. And when it was raining miserable, they'd play in the woodshed, you see. Be outside, but out of the rain. And there'd be family get-togethers all the time. You know, on a Sunday they would go from camp to camp. And there's Mom and Uncle Gene. Uncle Gene was the youngest. I think there was 6 in their family. 6 uncles and aunts. And there the dog Boots. And it looks like Mom's holding up a great big lingcod. Somebody caught a lingcod off the float, I guess. And he's going to cook it up, I guess. And there's Uncle Gene right there to the left. And here's Mom, Uncle Gene, Auntie Pearl, and Auntie Vaughn. Or the other way around, Auntie Vaughn, Auntie Pearl on the end there. And and I don't know who these guys are, but there's Grandma on the end here. Happy days. They didn't have much, but they were all happy. And there's Mom. And there's an old boat on the beach there. I think that was in Port Elizabeth on Guilford Island, not far from Minstrel. And you can see Mom there. She's a teenager, I guess. After she graduated out of the schools there, well, then they had to go to school out of town. They went to Victoria, where Dad, he went to Vancouver. There's Uncle John. So Uncle John and Mom, they went to school in Victoria. Mom took secretary and hairdressing. And there's Uncle John and 2 other characters. I don't know where that is, but there's buildings on the beach. And what have they got, holding up some fish there? I don't know what they're doing. But there's Uncle Paul. That's the guy I'm named after, and there he is again. So that was back in the steam donkey days, when Mom and her brothers and sisters were all growing up on the float camps. And yeah. And there she is. I guess she was working in the cookhouse. When she came home from school from Victoria, that's what they put her to work in the cookhouse, flunkying, probably making beds in the bunkhouses and doing the laundry and stuff like that. Everybody had to do their part. So then here's Mom and Auntie Vaughn. They went to Vancouver. And here's, I think it was Uncle Dan's wedding. He got married. And then I think they went to Alert Bay to get married. And then my cousin Pat was born. She was the first sibling in the Levesque family. And yeah, there's Uncle Dan right there. Got his good clothes on. When you lived up the coast, you had 2 sets of work clothes. One you worked in and one you hang around in. Then when you go to town, you put your good clothes on. And there's Pat Levesque. And there's Pat with Uncle Gene up on the side hill somewhere. And there's the woodshed again. And there they are. Maybe they're getting ready for another picnic. Yeah. They always like to go and find some nice beach and go to shore and get off the float. And there they are. They'd make a bonfire and they'd row to shore, anchor the boat out and row to shore. Then they'd go trout fishing, get some trout. And sometimes they'd catch a big salmon too, look at that. And Uncle Dan, he's splicing up some ropes for some reason. And Granddad, he got a medal for being one of the pioneers in BC. And there's Mom and Uncle John. They were in Victoria going to school. They liked to go to these dances, because there was always a dance somewhere, probably on the weekends, I guess. and Uncle Dan. He either bought a car or rented a car, I don't know. And then Mom and Auntie Yvonne go to Vancouver, and Mom joins the Air Force. She didn't want to go back to flunkying up the coast. So she joined the Air Force. 2 weeks later, Dad joined the Air Force. And you see that white stripe on his hat there. That means he's learning to fly. And then they met up in Calgary, Mom and Dad. And Dad, he went overseas to fly the Lancaster bomber. There's the Lancaster. This is an actual painting of one of the bombers that he flew. You see, they didn't have heat in there. They had to wear these here suits. And there's some of the pictures of the bombs dropping on. It looks like it was a, what do you call it, a submarine pen there. And after the war, the Governor General, he presented Dad with a Distinguished Flying Cross. And Mom, she got out of the Air Force before Dad. So she met him in Vancouver when Dad came across on the train, and they got married. They went on a honeymoon. Dad said they drove all the way to Tijuana, stopped at Disneyland and whatnot. And then Adele was born. That would have been 47, I guess. There they are in the rowboat. And there's me sitting on Nanny's knee there, and I was 1 year old, so that would have been 1950 maybe. And there I am eating the popcorn right off the Christmas tree, caught red-handed. And then the pots and pan salesman came to camp. He had a boat called the Glen Fruin. And Dad says, "How much for the boat?" And he bought the boat off of the pots and pan salesman. It didn't look exactly like this, but it looked something like this. It was called the Glen Fruin. We moved to Campbell River on it and lived right on the boat until the house was ready to move in. They bought a house from Oyster River and moved it to the 5 acres they bought in Campbell River, and Mom's cousin, Leo Levesque, he was a carpenter, he added another room on, because look at all the kids in our family. You see, Renee was born after we moved to Campbell River. I don't know if he was born while we're still living on the boat, or did we get into the house by that time. So, yeah. And then from Campbell River we moved to Dove Creek, had a one-room schoolhouse. There's Mrs. McLeod was the teacher. I was away this day, but there's Michelle and Philip. And, yeah. And Uncle Gene, you know, Granddad had him out blowing whistles when he was only 5 years old. And just like, you sit here with this whistle, and every time we yell at you, you press the button, and that would join the thing and blow the whistle on the donkey. And I guess they needed a whistle punk. And he wasn't quite in school yet, so he was the whistle punk. But he got killed in the logging camp when in his 20s. He was actually married by then. So him and his wife were in camp. And yeah, that's a tragic thing. Mom cried for weeks. But Uncle John, he had already died too. He fell overboard. They were on their way back from Minstrel Island. And after that, you know, there wasn't much passenger boat stuff. Everybody went by airplane. And Dad had a little airplane like this. I don't know if that's Dad's plane or not right there. He had a Cessna 150. And here's Grandma and Granddad. And I think this is in Grandma and Granddad's house in Kinkham Inlet. And this is Peter and Melody Levesque, Uncle Dan's kids. That would have been maybe 1965, right there, yeah. '64 maybe, 64, 65, something like that. And here they're having a big Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving or something in the cookhouse. All the big dinners were in the cookhouse. Everybody ate in the cookhouse. And, you know, a lot of guys that owned camps, they had 2 or 3 A-frames, and they'd take boats and run to the different A-frames. But Granddad, he liked to have his A-frame right with the camp. And so they could just come out of the cookhouse or the bunkhouse and go right to work. And it was pretty efficient. And he liked to log in Kinkum Inlet lots because there was lots of fresh water on top of the salt water, so then the Teredos wouldn't get into the float logs. And there's my aunt and uncle's house. It was the Scotts. So Uncle Jack, he came to run the donkey up the hill. And then Uncle Dan ran the donkey down below, and then I was the chaser to unhook the chokers. And there's the whistle. When I first started, I was whistle punk. So I was 16, and I was up the hill. You squeeze that together, that would blow the whistle on the donkey, tell you to go ahead or skin it back or slack the lines or whatever. Quit and whistle. Doot, 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 doot. And there's Uncle Jack. He got a couple Christmas trees, and so he's delivering a Christmas tree right here to Echo Bay. There was a hall at Echo Bay, and a school too, so maybe he was taking the Christmas tree to the school. And then there's 2, the one for themselves, I guess, and one for the school. And here's Uncle Dan and Auntie Marie. This is Uncle Dan's second wife, Marie. And but it was all the logging. And Granddad's donkey up the hill was called a Tyee. That was the coal decker. You see the coal deck, all the logs in one big pile, and then move the donkey down to the other spar tree and move that coal deck pile, and then down to the A-frame and boom them up. There's Uncle Jack, Jack Scott. His parents had a logging camp up there, and he inherited it. And here they are. I guess they went away on a cruise ship somewhere. Maybe they went up to Alaska, but they got clothes on like they went maybe Caribbean or something. And Grandma and Granddad had their, I don't know, it was a 50th or 60th anniversary. I forget exactly. There's a lot of the relatives in there, but there's a lot missing. Mom and Dad, and Phil and Marcel, and I don't know, Renee and Yvonne. But Adele and Eddie aren't there, but Judy and I showed up. But I guess we were just late for that picture. We weren't married yet. We were just going together. And we weren't even engaged yet. But anyway, we showed up there, but too late for the picture. Yeah, that's many years ago. I think this was after Granddad retired and sold the logging camp too. They moved to Squamish, bought a house in Squamish. And then Granddad died, so Grandma sold the house and got an apartment on Oak Street, or Highbury, or what do they call it? I don't know, the apartments that where Aunt Esther used to live, where I saw the first TV, 1957. I even remember the show that was on. But anyway, here's in Cumberland. After we were in Dove Creek, we moved to Cumberland, and they actually had phones on the wall with a dial. When we were in Dove Creek, they had no dial on the phone yet. It was pick it up and number, please, and there was like 4 or 5 people on the party line, so you had to listen. 1 ring, 2 rings, whatever your ring was, then you would answer the phone. So Mom and Adele in this picture were both pregnant at the same time. Adele got married pretty young, and Adele's kid was born first. Then Marcel was born. So Levon was older than Marcel. She called him Uncle Marcel. It was kind of weird. And one day I was on work. I was heading to Gold River to go to work. We lived in Cumberland. And I came through the back way, and here was Adele. So I took a picture of her. She was going to visit her sister-in-law, who lived just not far from where she's standing there. Yeah. Adele died when she was 26. She had 3 little girls. She got leukemia, and in those days they didn't even have anything in Canada to fix leukemia. So here's her daughters. And then now we're zooming over to Judy's family. And then that was Judy's mom and dad. So this is Judy's sisters. Judy tallest there, and then Joan and Faye and Shirley, and Judy's mom in the middle there. Now this would have been, I don't know, 1964, 63. And then Judy's family, I don't know who they are. And there's Ernie Doucette. Of course, he was in the war, when they got to Germany, they made him into an MP, and they wouldn't let him go home after the war ended. He had to stay and translate because he knew 5 languages. So he was an MP after that, and just when they were interrogating people, he'd translate. And then Judy and I, we got married when we were 19. We thought we knew everything. We did know everything. I had a good job, and Judy knew how to take care of a house, and we were in love, so that's all you needed in those days. And, it was just perfect. Yeah, we were both 19. So now we're still in love. We've always been in love. And there's Dad. He lived in Squamish, and there's Mom. She lived in Courtenay, and she had quite a life. We all had quite a life. And at the making of this video, I just turned 75, so it's kind of neat to look back on all this.